Conquest represents this idea as temples as cosmos. It's a very old idea, has lots of different manifestations. The second one would be the idea of coming from the Hebrew Bible. The third one coming from the Hellenistic culture around him. Related to that is the fourth idea. Does he get this from Philo? And the final idea is the common Jewish tradition. And as you know anything about giving presentations, you always put the idea that you think's most likely last, right? So you end up there, so it all makes everybody feel like you're going the right direction, right? There's lots to be done in this scholarship on this, but I want to quickly do this. Ancient Near Eastern history, as we just talked about, there's lots of very ancient traditions of temples of cosmos, and the cosmic mountain, and the assignment of the different parts of Egyptian and Mesopotamian temples. Ziggurats, for example, named after the great mountain and things like that. But there's no evidence in Josephus that he's consciously following these traditions. In other words, we've got to find something in Josephus that says, oh yeah, he knows this, he knows this. He simply states it. So even though this might be behind everything Josephus is doing, we can't find the data that puts him there. Number two, the biblical traditions. Latter-day Saints are always also quite familiar with these traditions. The Bible does compare the building of the tabernacle to the creation story. And it does that with all sorts of use of sevens and the language of God pronouncing the work is done, like Moses pronouncing the work is done in the tabernacle. There's a huge narrative strategy in the Bible that presents the tabernacle as creation. Josephus, oddly enough, completely destroys that narrative pattern by leaving out the model part. In other words, when in the Bible, when God goes, or Moses goes on Sinai to God, and God says, I'll give you the plan of the tabernacle. Remember those long 5 chapters there, and then 4 chapters later, the same 5 chapters, remember, as they build it. Josephus has just eliminated that. So he's eliminated that narrative actually on here. Some see some really far-fetched allusions to cosmic imagery in the Bible, such as the 7 eyes in Zechariah, or there's an allusion to thunder and lightning that might be related to pomegranates and bells. But none of these specific traditions can be tracked in Josephus in terms of this idea. 3, Hellenistic culture. Now here there's something interesting. At the time of Josephus, there was an idea that's largely held by Cynics and Stoics that, in fact, the cosmos was a temple. I'm just going to read you one quote here from Pseudo-Heraclitus. You ignorant men, don't you know that God is not wrought by hands and has not from the beginning had a pedestal and does not have a single enclosure? Rather, the whole world is his temple, decorated with animals, planets, and stars. There's a sense in which this idea of temples cosmos would have resonated with the audience of Josephus at this time. So we're going to come back to that in just a minute. D, Philo. This is a great topic. Philo has 2 entire works describing the tabernacle as the cosmos. Okay, and he gives a detailed kind of assignment of meaning just like Josephus. Now the question whether Josephus knows Philo or not is a really hard one, and scholars are divided on this. Okay, the consensus seems to be he doesn't know Philo. He doesn't read Philo. He doesn't do allegory like Philo. Josephus does allegory sort of just spur of the moment. Oh, this must represent this. Whereas Josephus, of course, has a long program of teaching Platonic kinds of things by his associations. And in most cases, Philo and Josephus don't share enough common ground. But here they do. So if Josephus knows Philo, it's here that he knows him in terms of the data. I've got a little chart here that gets messed up when you start doing these wonderful kinds of formatting here. But you can clearly see that Philo and Josephus share an idea that the symbols might be the same in terms of the tabernacle as the cosmos. Finally, Jewish traditions. And this is really, really simple, and that is that other Jewish traditions at the time of Josephus or before Josephus, such as the Wisdom of Solomon, the Letter of Aristeas, such as Philo, they know this idea. And we also know that this idea has survived in a text that's been preserved within Rabbinic Judaism, and it's called Midrash Tadshe. And Midrash Tadshe gives us almost exactly the same idea that was preserved by Josephus and Philo. So, the common consensus of scholarship is that Philo knows this idea from a Jewish tradition, a Jewish priestly temple tradition that's also known by Philo, and it's also known by other Jewish writers, okay, because they share the idea and then it's preserved, finally. So our best solution is that this is one of these Jewish traditions. see there, I just state what I just told you. The most logical conclusion of these works all share knowledge of a common Jewish tradition. Number 2, the tradition does continue in this rabbinic text, but we need to say something here. The bulk of rabbinic literature does not preserve this tradition. It survives within the tradition, but it's not mainstream. The mainstream rabbinic tradition is that the tabernacle represents the heavenly tabernacle, which I tried to argue at the beginning is actually a different idea. It's a related idea, but it's a different idea than to say the tabernacle is the universe here. We can't hate this text, and we'll talk about this a little bit later, but that's how our line of reasoning works. Number 3, why would Josephus include this idea in his work? And a really profound thing that you can always ask yourself in reading a text like this is, to whom is Josephus writing? And the most obvious thing you can deduce is he's writing to someone who knows Greek, right? Because he writes in Greek. How profound is that, right? We don't know why he wrote in Greek, actually. Our suspicion is because he knows it better than Latin, because he probably could have gotten by in writing in Latin here to the kind of audience he's targeting here. But it's clear to us that from the beginning of Antiquities, Josephus tells us his audience is to all the Greeks, okay? His audience is not primarily a Jewish audience. And almost any time he talks about something Jewish, he goes way out of his way to explain what it means and where it comes from, okay? We think that authors have an idea of a secondary audience. Greek-speaking Jewish people might read this, okay? And there's some evidence in his work that he tells us, I'm writing special things to these. There's even some evidence that he wrote maybe an Aramaic piece to the Jews. But this work is written for a Greco-Roman or Hellenistic audience. Now, this is a big topic. What are the themes he's trying to accomplish in Antiquities? And this just reflects sort of Josephus' scholarship. First and foremost, he's defending the antiquity of Jewish culture. And in Roman law, the respect given to any ancient religion was based on how old it was. Okay, that's one of the reasons that the Judaism didn't suffer the kinds of persecutions Christians did, because Judaism could prove an antiquity of their religion. But it's not just antiquity to protect yourself under the law. Josephus believed that this was the most ancient of cultures, and in his book Antiquities, he can trace it back to the very beginning, creation. He says, you know, Moses couldn't make any of the laws unless he understands creation first. And then he tells us Genesis 1 and 2. Number 2, he's defending the Constitution, what we would call in Latter-day Saints the Law of Moses, as the politeia, as the ancient, universal, long-living, and the best constitution for governing people. This is a really profound aspect of Antiquities that he tracks through. And in his summary in Book 20, that's what he wants us to remember, the superiority of the Jewish constitution, their law, their way of law. And number 3, the idea of moralizing history. Josephus believes, and I've got a great quote here, I'm going to do it right now. Since Moses desired to teach this lesson to his fellow citizens, he did not begin the arrangement of his laws with contracts and the rights of people with one another in a manner similar to others, but he led their thoughts up to God and the structure of the universe. He starts with the universe here. Our legislator, having shown that God possesses a virtue that is pure, thought human beings ought to try to participate in it. And he goes on to say that those who will live by the principles of this virtue of God manifested in this Constitution will be blessed, and those who don't will be cursed. And this is the moralizing of the history that Josephus is doing. A really fascinating way of retelling history. Okay, I'm going to just finalize this issue with this quote from a scholar. The Hellenistic era had witnessed the extension of the notion of nomos to cosmic portions, that means law, especially since the Stoics regarded nomos as the expression of ho kosmos. Man being cosmopolites, a man of the polis, must order his life by this cosmic nomos or universal law. So a solution to why Josephus includes this idea is that the people that would read his work would have seen the universality of law and universality of tabernacle going together to teach them about this wonderful universal kind of a God. And we've already read that quote. We've already read that quote, and we've already given you the conclusions. So let's go to number 4. Significance for the study of the history of Judaism. I'm going to skip this because that gives away what we're going to talk about. 1935, a really spectacular discovery was made in a place called Dur Europos, which is a place in Syria, where we discovered a Jewish synagogue that is fully stocked with Jewish art. right? You look at that wall and you can hardly imagine that a Jewish person would have made this. And here we do have some depictions of the temple, okay? This is the depiction of Aaron's temple, okay?